How did Iran become a crossroads of civilizations and the heart of the East? What events led to this land becoming the birthplace of one of the greatest empires of antiquity? Why was it here that Zoroastrianism was born, and later, that the Islamic Revolution took place, changing the fate not only of Iran itself, but of the entire world? These deserts and mountains have witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the intersection of trade routes, and the clash of diverse cultures and religions. Modern Iran covers an area of 1,648,195 square kilometers, 636,372 square miles. The 17th largest country in the world, located between the Caspian Sea to the north and the Persian Gulf to the south. The modern capital, Tehran, is a metropolis of 10 million people, while other major cities, Isfahan, Shiraz, Mashhad, and Tabriz, bear traces of millennia of history. The country has the world's third largest oil reserves and the second largest natural gas reserves, making it one of the planet's leading energy giants. Most of the country's territory lies on the Iranian plateau, surrounded by the Alborz and Zagros mountain ranges, while the eastern regions are occupied by the Dasht-e-Kavir and Dasht-e-Lut deserts. The country's climate varies widely, from subtropical in the north to arid desert in the center and east. However, the astonishing historical fact is that this land has seen continuous state formation for over 2,500 years, from the Achaemenid Empire to the modern Islamic Republic. The Persian language, culture, and traditions have spread far beyond its modern borders, influencing the development of civilizations from India to Turkey. Today, Iran remains a vital regional player whose policies influence the entire Middle East and beyond. This is the history of Iran. Please subscribe to the channel, like, and leave comments. Your support helps us create high-quality historical content. The history of the Iranian lands begins in ancient times, when the Neanderthals of the Middle Paleolithic era inhabited the area. Around 36,000 years ago, they were replaced by the Cro-Magnons of the Baradost culture and then the Zarzia culture. During the pre-literate period, the most powerful state in this area was Elam, which rivaled the Sumerians, and the eastern part fell under the influence of the Indus Valley civilization. Archaeologists also identify the Jiroft culture of the early Bronze Age, which existed in the 3rd to 1st millennia BC. The first reliably known state, Elam, emerged in Khuzestan as early as the 3rd millennium BC, with its capital in Susa. The Elamite civilization developed its own written language, developed architecture, and established trade links with neighboring regions. The Elamites offered significant resistance to the powerful Mesopotamian empires, the Babylonians and Assyrians. Their state endured for over 1,500 years, leaving behind a rich cultural heritage and traditions of governance, which were later inherited by the Persians. It is unknown exactly when Iranian tribes migrated from Central Asia to the Iranian plateau, but it most likely occurred between 2000 and 1500 BC. Iranian peoples became dominant in the area by the beginning of the 1st millennium BC. Some tribes, Persians, Medes, Bactrians, and Parthians, settled in the western part of the plateau, while the Baloch settled in the east and along the coast of the Gulf of Oman. These tribes brought with them a new culture, language, and religious beliefs, which eventually evolved into Zoroastrianism. The first significant Iranian state was the Median Kingdom, founded in the late 8th and early 7th centuries BC, with its capital in Hamadan. The Medes succeeded in establishing control over all of western Iran and part of eastern Iran. They developed an effective military organization and administrative system that later became a model for the Persians. The Medes actively participated in the international politics of the time, forming alliances with Babylon against their common enemy, the Assyrian Empire. In 614 to 612 BC, The alliance of the Medes and Babylonians finally defeated Assyria, dividing its territories between them. But an event that changed the entire history of the region occurred in the mid-6th century BC. In 553, the young Persian king of Anshan and Parsa, Cyrus of the Achaemenid dynasty, revolted against the Medes. Together with the Babylonians, the Medes had previously defeated the Assyrian Empire, conquered northern Mesopotamia and Urartu, but now their power was coming to an end. Cyrus captured Ecbatana and declared himself king of Persia and Media. The Median king, Ishtuvegu, was captured but later released and appointed governor of one of the provinces. This decision demonstrated the political wisdom of Cyrus, who preferred the reconciliation and integration of conquered peoples to their destruction. The founder of the Persian monarchy, Cyrus the Great, who reigned from 558 to 529 BC, conquered all of Western Asia and the eastern part of the Iranian world as far as the Sir-Daria River. His capital was the city of Pasargadae in Fars, in the Polvar River Valley. The tomb of Cyrus in Pasargadae has survived to this day and is one of the oldest monuments of Persian architecture. Cyrus created an entirely new type of empire based on tolerance for local traditions and religions. His famous cylinder, found in Babylon, is considered one of the first human rights documents in history. The Achaemenid Empire became one of the greatest empires of antiquity, lasting from 550 to 330 BC and encompassing the territories of modern-day Iran, Iraq, Egypt, Syria, Turkey, and other regions. Cambyses II, who reigned from 529 to 522 BC, added ancient Egypt and part of Ethiopia to these conquests. Cambyses's Egyptian campaign was a carefully planned operation that included diplomatic negotiations with Arab tribes and securing a water supply for the army in the desert. The Persians showed respect for Egyptian culture and religion, which facilitated the integration of this ancient civilization into the empire. The death of Cambyses sparked unrest, after which the throne passed to a junior line of the Achaemenids, represented by Darius I Hystaspes, who reigned from 521 to 486 BC. Darius I quelled the rebellions that had broken out in all parts of the monarchy, consolidated the Achaemenid throne, and established a proper state structure. His rise to power was accompanied by a massive civil war, during which he defeated 9 impostor kings, as detailed in the famous Behistun inscription. The state's borders were expanded by the conquest of Central Asian and Indian peoples and the subjugation of part of the Balkan Peninsula. Under Darius I, the Persian Empire stretched from Greece and Cyrenaica to the Indus and Tarim rivers. Persia was the most populous state in history. 50% of the world's population were subjects of the Achaemenids. Such a vast empire required entirely new approaches to governance. Darius introduced a proper gold coinage system in Persia, standardized weights and measures, and built a road network with post stations. The famous Royal Road stretched from Sardis in Lydia to Susa, a distance of over 2,500 kilometers. Under his rule, the religion of Zoroaster was finally established as the dominant religion in the empire, although the Persian government treated the religions of conquered peoples with the utmost tolerance. The monarchy's capital at this time was Susa in Khuzestan, while Darius founded Persepolis on the Polvar River, just downstream from Pasargadae. Persepolis became the greatest architectural achievement of the Achaemenid Empire, a grand palace complex that took over a century to build and served as the ceremonial capital. Every year, during the Nowruz festival, representatives of all the peoples of the empire gathered here, bringing gifts to the great king. The reliefs of Persepolis capture this diversity. Here you can see Scythians and Indians, Arabs and Ethiopians, each in their national dress and bearing their own gifts. Each of the conquered peoples retained its own language, religion, customs, laws, and often even its own national leaders. But a common administration reigned supreme. The state was divided into satrapies, numbering between 23 and 31. Each satrap was headed by a satrap, whose primary responsibility was to oversee the proper collection of taxes and duties and the cultivation of the land. Satraps enjoyed broad powers, but their activities were overseen by royal inspectors, known as the ears and eyes of the king. Mounted couriers established communications between the capital, Susa, and the provinces, allowing for the rapid transmission of orders and the receipt of information from the most remote corners of the empire. But the collapse of the great power began with the Greco-Persian Wars, which lasted from 499 to 449 BC. The failures of Xerxes, who reigned from 486 to 486 BC, 465 BC, in Greece did not shake Persian power in Asia, but they did diminish the authority of the central government. The Battle of Marathon in 490 BC became a symbol of Greek resistance to Persian expansion. The campaigns of Darius and Xerxes in Greece demonstrated the limits of even the most powerful ancient empire. The vast Persian armies were shattered by the tenacity of small Greek city-states defending their freedom. Cyrus's conquests introduced Assyrian and Lydian luxury into the Persian environment. From the Medes, the Persians assumed the dominance of the Magi, who were considered the sole intermediaries between people and the divine. Persian education was aimed at developing a warrior spirit, a sense of honor, truthfulness, and a love of glory. Persian nobles were educated in special schools where they learned 3 essential skills: archery, horsemanship, and truthfulness. This code of honor became the foundation of Persian statehood and military might. Persian warriors were renowned for their discipline and courage, and Persian satraps for their administrative skills. Nevertheless, the gradual Hellenization of the Persian nobility and corruption within the administrative system weakened the empire from within. Palace intrigues, satrap rebellions, and internecine wars for the throne undermined the unity of the state. Paradoxically, the very tolerance for local traditions that had been the empire's strength eventually became its weakness. The various peoples retained their identities and strove for independence at the first opportunity. The Egyptians repeatedly rebelled against Persian rule, and the Greek cities of Asia Minor continually strove for autonomy. Alexander the Great dealt a decisive blow to the empire. Alexander the Great's Persian campaign lasted from 334 to 330 BC, and he proclaimed himself the great king of Macedonia and Persia. The Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC was the final battle between the Greeks and Persians for control of the empire. Darius III fled the battlefield, and Alexander captured Babylon, Susa, and finally Persepolis. The burning of Persepolis became the symbolic end of the Achaemenid Empire, although Alexander later regretted this action. He adopted Persian ceremonies and traditions, married Darius's daughter, and sought to create a Greco-Persian empire uniting East and West. After the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC, his empire fragmented into several separate states. Most of the territory of modern-day Iran was annexed by Seleucia, founded by one of Alexander's generals, Seleucus, the first Nicator. The Seleucids attempted to continue the policy of Hellenization, founding new cities and spreading Greek culture. However, their hold on the eastern regions was weak, and the local population remained loyal to Iranian traditions. Gradually, the eastern satrapies, first Bactria, then Parthia, began to fall away from the Seleucid Empire. Around 250 BC, the Parthian tribe, led by Arshak, rebelled against the Seleucid governor and founded the independent Parthian kingdom. The Parthian king, Mithridates I, who reigned from 170 to 138 BC, launched campaigns of conquest against the Seleucids and incorporated Persia and Mesopotamia into his empire. The Parthians, being an Iranian-speaking people, easily assimilated with the local population and adopted many Achaemenid traditions. They created a federal empire where local nobles retained considerable autonomy under the supreme authority of the Parthian king of kings. The Parthian Empire became the successor to the Achaemenid Empire and Rome's main rival in the east. In 92 BC, a border was established between Parthia and Rome along the Euphrates River, but the Romans almost immediately invaded the western Parthian satrapies and suffered a crushing defeat at Carrhae in 53 BC. The Roman general Crassus died, and his legions were almost completely annihilated by Parthian horse archers. In a retaliatory campaign, the Parthians captured all of the Levant and Anatolia, but were driven back to the Euphrates by Mark Antony's forces. Soon after, civil wars broke out in Parthia one after another, sparked by Rome's intervention in the struggle between the Parthian and Greek nobility. The Parthian Empire's system of government, based on federalism and the autonomy of vassal kingdoms, made it vulnerable to internal conflicts. The Parthian kings were forced to constantly contend with rebellions by local rulers and claims to the throne by various branches of the Arsacid dynasty. These endless internecine strife weakened the empire and undermined its ability to withstand external threats. In 224 AD, events took an unexpected turn. Ardashir Papakan, son of the ruler of the small town of Kher in Pars, defeated the Parthian army of Artabanus IV and founded the Second Persian Empire, Iran Shah, meaning Kingdom of the Aryans, with its capital in Firuzabad. Ardashir became the founder of a new dynasty, the Sassanids, which claimed direct descent from the Achaemenids. The name of the new empire, Iran Shah, emphasized its Iranian character and its opposition to the Hellenistic traditions of Parthia. The Sassanids proclaimed the restoration of a truly Persian state and ancient Zoroastrian traditions. Under the Sassanids, the influence of the aristocracy and Zoroastrian clergy increased, and persecution of non-believers began. An administrative reform was carried out, creating a more centralized system of government compared to the federal Parthia. The Sassanid kings bore the title of Shahanshah, King of Kings, and claimed divine origins for their power. Under them, Zoroastrianism became a strictly organized state religion with a developed priestly hierarchy and an extensive body of religious texts. The highest Zoroastrian priest, the Mobadan Mobd, wielded enormous political power and participated in the coronations of kings. The Iranian kingdom flourished between 499 and 531 AD. The reign of the reformist king Khosrow, Anushirvan, 531 to 579, is particularly notable. During his reign, tax reform was implemented, the army was modernized, and science and education developed. Khosrow patronized scholars and philosophers, and Greek, Indian, and Iranian thinkers worked at his court. The Academy of Gundishapur was founded, becoming the largest center of science and medicine of the time. The Sasanian Empire became a bridge between classical and medieval science, preserving and developing the achievements of Greek philosophy and Indian mathematics. The Sassanid Empire, also known as the Kingdom of Iran, was a powerful empire that rivaled the Byzantine Empire for regional dominance. The Sassanid-Byzantine wars lasted for over 300 years with varying success. The Persians repeatedly captured Syria and Egypt and even besieged Constantinople. Under Khosrow, the second Parviz in the early 7th century CE, the Sassanid Empire reached its greatest territorial extent, controlling lands from the Caucasus to Egypt. However, these massive conquests exhausted the empire's resources and left it vulnerable to a new enemy, the Arab tribes united by Islam. The Sasanian Empire lasted for over 400 years, but its end was predetermined by the emergence of a new force, the Arab conquerors. Arab raids on Sasanian Iran began in 632 AD. Initially, these were simple plundering raids by nomadic tribes, but they soon escalated into a systematic campaign to conquer the empire. The Persian army, exhausted by long wars with the Byzantine Empire and internal strife, was unable to effectively resist the mobile Arab forces. The Persian army suffered its most crushing defeat at the Battle of Qadisiyah in 637 AD, where the last great Sasanian commander, Rustam Farrokhzad, perished. The Arab conquest of Persia lasted until 652, and it was incorporated into the Umayyad Caliphate. The last Sassanid king, Yazdegerd III, fled to Central Asia, where he was assassinated in 651. The Arabs spread Islam to Iran, which greatly transformed Persian culture. However, Islamization was a lengthy process, lasting several centuries. Many Persians initially converted to Islam formally, while maintaining Zoroastrian traditions in their daily lives. Zoroastrians were granted the status of Ahl al-Kitab, people of the book, which granted them certain rights and protections, although they paid a special tax, the jizya. Following the Islamization of Iran, literature, philosophy, art, and medicine flourished in the Caliphate. Persian culture became the foundation for the beginning of the Islamic Golden Age. Persian scholars, writers, and artists made a huge contribution to the development of Islamic civilization. Cities such as Baghdad, Isfahan, Nishapur, and Bukhara became centers of science and education. The Persian language, Dari, became the language of poetry and high literature in the Islamic world. The great poets Rudaki, Ferdowsi, Hafez, and Sa'adi created masterpieces that are still read and studied throughout the world. The assassination of Ali ibn Abu Talib, the fourth rightly guided caliph and the first imam of the Shiites, occurred in 661, laying the foundations for the future Shiite movement in Islam. Persians embraced Shiism en masse, seeing it as a counterweight to the Sunni Arab majority. Shiism became a form of Iranian national resistance to Arab cultural dominance. The martyrdom of Imam Hussein in Karbala in 680 became the central event of Shiite history, and his annual commemoration became a crucial religious ritual, particularly popular among Iranians. In 750, the Persian general Abu Muslim led the Abbasid campaign against the Umayyads, first to Damascus and then to the capital of the Caliphate, Baghdad. The Abbasid revolution relied heavily on Persian support, and the Persians played a key role in the overthrow of the Umayyad dynasty. In gratitude, the new caliph granted the Persian governors a measure of autonomy and also took several Persians as viziers. The Barmakid family effectively ruled the caliphate in the name of Harun al-Rashid. Persian traditions of statecraft, dating back to the Sassanids, were adapted to the needs of the Islamic Empire. But the desire for independence did not fade in Persian hearts. The anti-Arab revolt led by Babak in western Iran and Azerbaijan lasted from 816 to 837. Babak created an independent state based on the Kuramite movement, which combined elements of Zoroastrianism and Islam. His armies repeatedly defeated the Caliphal forces and controlled significant territory. Only after a lengthy siege did the caliphs manage to capture the fortress of Baz and execute Babak, but his rebellion exposed the weakness of the central government. Nevertheless, in 822, Tahir ibn Hussein ibn Musab, governor of Khorasan, declared the province's independence and declared himself the founder of a new Persian dynasty, the Tahirids. This marked the beginning of the revival of Iranian statehood in the Islamic era. The Tahirids ruled Khorasan until 873, when they were succeeded by the Saffarids and then the Samanids. By the beginning of the Samanid era, Iran had practically regained its independence from the Arabs. The Samanid state became the center of the Persian Renaissance, and under them, Persian once again became the language of administration and culture. However, this period of relative peace ended with the arrival of new conquerors from the east. A new wave of conquests brought Turkic tribes to Iran. The Seljuk conquest of Iran lasted from 1037 to 1055. The Seljuks were Turkic nomads who had converted to Sunni Islam. Their military organization, based on heavily armored cavalry, proved invincible against the traditional armies of the time. The reign of Malik Shah I from 1072 to 1092 marked the period when the Seljuk Empire reached its peak, controlling territories from Anatolia to Central Asia. The Seljuks brought new administrative traditions and established the vizierate system. The reign of Ahmad Sanja from 1118 to 1157 marked the end of this empire. He was the last sultan of the unified Seljukid Empire. The Seljuks brought new administrative traditions and Sunni orthodoxy to Iran. They established the institution of the vizierate, which effectively governed the empire in the name of the sultan. The famous vizier Nizam al-Mulk wrote the treatise Siyaset-Name on the principles of state administration, which became a classic work of political thought. The Seljuks patronized the construction of madrasas and the development of Islamic scholarship. Such eminent thinkers as Omar Khayyam, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, and Nizami Ganjavi worked under them. The reign of Malik Shah's son, Ahmad Sanja, from 1118 to 1153 marked the end of this empire. He was the last sultan of the unified Seljukid Empire. After his death, the state fragmented into numerous small principalities, which waged endless wars among themselves. This was exploited by new conquerors from the east, the Khwarezm Shahs, who, by the early 13th century, had united most of Iran and Central Asia under their rule. However, their reign was destined to be the last before the most devastating invasion in the region's history. Even more devastating was the Mongol invasion of the 13th century, when the armies of Genghis Khan and his descendants devastated many Iranian cities. The Mongol conquest began in 1219 with the invasion of Khwarezm. Cities that resisted were completely destroyed. Libraries were burned, irrigation systems destroyed, and the population of many regions was almost completely exterminated. Ancient centers of civilization such as Merv, Nishapur, and Ray were reduced to rubble. Contemporaries wrote that in some cities not a single living creature remained, not even dogs or cats. The Mongol rulers gradually embraced Islam and Persian culture, but the country's recovery took many decades. The Ilkhans, who ruled Iran from 1256 to 1353, gradually shifted from a policy of destruction to construction. Under Ghazan Khan, who converted to Islam in 1295, economic and cultural recovery began. His vizier, Rashid al-Din, wrote the world history Jami al-Tawarik, which became one of the most important historical works of the Middle Ages. Iran later became part of Timur's empire, and after its collapse in the 14th and 15th centuries, various Turkic dynasties existed within the country. Timur conquered Iran in the late 14th century, continuing the traditions of the Mongol conquerors. His campaigns were accompanied by widespread destruction and deportation of the population. However, Timur, unlike the early Mongols, sought to create a great empire centered in Samarkand. After Timur's death in 1405, his empire disintegrated, and Iran was divided among various Timurid princes and Turkic tribal confederations. The unification of Iran under a single dynasty occurred under the Safavids in the early 16th century. In 1501, Shah Ismail I founded the Safavid state, proclaiming Shi'ism as the state religion. This decision had enormous consequences for the entire region, as it created religious confrontation with the Sunni Ottoman Empire in the west and the Uzbek Khanates in the east. The Safavids descended from a Sufi order founded by Sheikh Safi al-Din in Ardabil in the 14th century. Their rise to power signaled the triumph of Shiite ideology and Iranian nationalism over the Turkic traditions of previous dynasties. Transforming Iran into a Shiite state required a massive effort to convert the population, most of whom professed Sunni Islam or adhered to various Sufi traditions. The Safavids invited Shiite theologians from Lebanon and Iraq to create a new religious elite. New mosques and madrasas were built, and mass ceremonies commemorating Shiite imams were held. Gradually, Shi'ism became an integral part of Iranian identity, distinguishing the Persians from their Sunni neighbors, the Turks and Arabs. The Safavid state reached its peak during the reign of Shah Abbas I, from 1587 to 1629. Under him, the capital was moved to Isfahan, which became one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Isfahan, during Abbas's reign, amazed contemporaries with its splendor: wide avenues, luxurious palaces, exquisite mosques, and caravanserais. The central square, Naqsh-e-Jahan, became one of the largest squares in the world, surrounded by masterpieces of Safavid architecture. Under Abbas, diplomatic relations were established with European powers, and trade and crafts developed. Shah Abbas carried out military reforms, creating a standing army modeled on European ones, using firearms. He invited English and Dutch military advisors and artillery men. The new army enabled Abbas to recapture the western provinces of Iran from the Ottomans and expel the Uzbeks from Khorasan. Under his rule, the Safavid Empire achieved its greatest territorial expansion and became an important player in international politics. European powers sought an alliance with Iran against their common enemy, the Ottomans. The Safavid dynasty fell in 1722 after an Afghan invasion. Afghan Ghilzai tribes, led by Mir Mahmud, rebelled against Safavid rule and captured Isfahan. The last Safavid Shah, Sultan Hussein, was deposed and the country plunged into chaos. Afghan rule was short-lived and brutal. They destroyed many artistic monuments and persecuted the Shiite clergy. Their authority extended only to the central regions of Iran, while the outlying areas effectively became independent. A period of chaos followed until Nader Shah restored the Persian state and proclaimed himself Shah in 1736. Nader was from the Turkic Afshar tribe and initially served the Safavids in the fight against the Afghans. Gradually, he seized complete power and removed the last Safavids from the throne. Nader Shah was an outstanding military leader, but his reign was largely military in nature and drained the country's resources. He led successful campaigns in India, capturing Delhi and returning many treasures to Iran, including the famous Koh-i-Noor diamond and the peacock throne of the great Mughals. Nader attempted to reconcile the Shiites and Sunnis by proposing to recognize Shi'ism as the fifth true school of Islam, alongside the four Sunni schools. However, this attempt was unsuccessful and provoked discontent among the Shiite clergy. His constant wars and high taxes led to uprisings in various parts of the empire. After the assassination of Nader Shah in 1747, the country again descended into civil strife. Various warlords and tribal chieftains vied for power, tearing the country apart. Stability was restored under the Zand dynasty, which ruled southern Iran from 1751 to 1794, and then under the Qajars, who ruled from 1794 to 1925. Karim Khan Zand established a benign rule and renounced the title of Shah, calling himself only the Vakil of the people. Under him, Shiraz became a flourishing center of trade and culture. However, after Karim Khan's death, civil strife broke out, which Qajar leaders exploited to seize power. The Qajars were a Turkic tribe who supported the Safavids, but later struggled for power with other claimants. Aga Muhammad Khan. Qajar united the country with an iron fist, but his rule was brutal. As a result of a series of unsuccessful wars with the Russian Empire, Persia, under the Qajars, lost territory now occupied by Azerbaijan and Armenia. The Russo-Persian Wars of 1804 to 1813 and 1826 to 1828 ended with the treaties of Gulistan and Turkmenchay, under which Iran lost significant territories and was forced to pay a huge indemnity. Under the Qajars, corruption flourished and control over the country's outskirts was lost. The central government was weak and local khans and governors were effectively independent rulers. The economy was in decline and trade was controlled by foreigners, the Russians in the north and the British in the south. Iran became an arena for rivalry between the Russian and British empires, known as the Great Game. Both powers sought to expand their influence and secure economic concessions. Dissatisfaction with foreign dominance and the arbitrary rule of the Qajar administration led to a revolutionary movement. Following protracted protests, the constitutional revolution took place in 1906, establishing Iran as a constitutional monarchy. The revolution began with an uprising in Tehran and spread throughout the country. Shah Mozaffar al-Din was forced to agree to a constitution and the creation of a parliament, the Majlis. This was the first constitutional movement in the Muslim world, inspired by the ideas of European liberalism and Iranian democratic traditions. However, the new Shah, Muhammad Ali, attempted to restore absolutism, leading to a civil war between constitutionalists and royalists. The constitutional movement received support from the clergy, merchants, and intellectuals, while the Shah relied on a Cossack brigade and tribal cavalry. In 1909, the constitutionalists captured Tehran and deposed Muhammad Ali, placing his young son Ahmed on the throne. In the summer of 1918, British troops occupied all of Iran under the pretext of protecting it from the Bolshevik threat. World War I had turned Iran into a theater of war between the Russians, Turks, and the British, despite the country's formal declaration of neutrality. The occupation inflicted enormous economic damage and led to a famine that claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. On August 9, 1919, the Anglo-Iranian Agreement was signed, establishing complete British control over the country's economy and military. But the Iranian people did not accept the loss of independence. In 1920, the Gilan Soviet Republic was proclaimed in Gilan Province, which would last until September 1921. This state was created with the support of Bolshevik Russia and Iranian communists led by Mirza Kuchik Khan. The Gilan Republic implemented radical social reforms and fought against British influence, but was unable to extend its authority beyond the northern provinces. On February 21, 1921, Colonel Reza Khan Pahlavi staged a military coup, overthrowing the weak Qajar government and, in 1925, was declared the new Shah, founding the Pahlavi dynasty. Reza Khan was the commander of the Persian Cossack Brigade and enjoyed the support of the army. His coup was supported by the British, who saw him as a strong ruler capable of ensuring stability and protection from Soviet influence. On February 26, 1921, the Russian SFSR signed a new treaty with Iran, recognizing Iran's full independence and renounced the Tsarist concessions. Reza Pahlavi introduced the ancient title of Shahanshah, King of Kings. Beginning with the Persian New Year, March 22, 1935, the name of the state was officially changed from Persia to Iran. This renaming emphasized the Iranian, not just Persian, identity of the state, which included various Iranian peoples. Iran's large-scale industrialization began, and its infrastructure was completely modernized. Railways, factories, schools, and hospitals were built. Reza Shah implemented administrative, legal, and educational reforms along European lines. Particular attention was paid to creating a modern army and suppressing tribal autonomy. Nomadic tribes were forced to settle, and their leaders were stripped of power. A policy of forced westernization was implemented. Men were required to wear European clothing, and women were forbidden to appear in public wearing the chador. These measures provoked resistance from conservative sections of society and the clergy. But Reza Shah suppressed any signs of discontent with force. During World War II, the Shah refused Britain and the Soviet Union's request to station troops in Iran to secure Lend-Lease supplies. Iran declared neutrality, but its sympathies for Germany were obvious. Reza Shah saw Nazi Germany as a counterweight to Anglo-Soviet pressure and developed economic ties with it. Then the Allies invaded Iran on August 25, 1941, overthrew the Shah, and established control over the railways and oil fields. In 1942, Iran's sovereignty was formally restored, with power transferred to the Shah's son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. However, the country remained effectively occupied by the Allies until the end of the war. Nevertheless, the Soviet Union, fearing possible Turkish aggression, maintained its troops in northern Iran until May 1946. Autonomous governments were established in Azerbaijan and Kurdistan within the Soviet occupation zone, but after the withdrawal of Soviet troops, the central government regained control of these territories. The post-war period was marked by a struggle for control of oil resources. In 1951, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized the oil industry, leading to an international crisis. Britain imposed an economic blockade on Iran, and the CIA and British intelligence orchestrated a coup in August 1953, restoring the Shah's full power. Thereafter, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi ruled as an absolute monarch, relying on the army and the SAVAK secret police. Under Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the country's modernization continued, with land and social reforms, known as the White Revolution, implemented. The reform program included land reform, women's suffrage, the nationalization of forests and water resources, and the privatization of state-owned enterprises. Oil revenues allowed the government to invest in education, healthcare, and industry. Iran became a regional power with a modern army and a developed economy. The Shah dreamed of transforming Iran into a great civilization equal to ancient Persia. In 1971, he held grand celebrations in Persepolis to commemorate the 2,500 years of Persian monarchy. Heads of state and members of royal families from around the world were invited to the festivities. The opulence of the ceremonies was intended to demonstrate the rebirth of Persia's greatness, but it drew criticism from the opposition, who pointed to the poverty of the majority of the population. However, growing discontent with the Shah's regime, corruption, secret police repression, and excessive Western influence led to mass protests in the 1970s. The opposition united various forces, from Islamists to left-wing radicals and liberal Democrats. A special role was played by the Shiite clergy, led by Ayatollah Khomeini, who had been in exile since 1964. His writings and leaflets were secretly distributed throughout the country, calling for the overthrow of the Shah's regime and the establishment of an Islamic state. In 1979, the Islamic Revolution, led by Ayatollah Khomeini, took place in Iran, overthrowing the monarchy and proclaiming an Islamic republic. The revolution began with demonstrations in various cities and quickly escalated into a nationwide uprising. The army refused to fire on the people, and strikes paralyzed the economy. The Shah fled the country in January 1979. And on February 1st of that year, Ayatollah Khomeini triumphantly returned from exile in France to Tehran, where he was greeted by millions. On February 11th, 1979, the old government finally fell after army units joined the revolutionaries. The Islamic Revolution radically transformed not only Iran but the entire region. A new constitution was adopted based on the concept of velayat-e-faqih, rule by an Islamic jurist. Ayatollah Khomeini became supreme leader, and the country was renamed the Islamic Republic of Iran. The revolution brought about sweeping changes in the economy, education, legal system, and international relations. Many members of the middle class and intelligentsia fled the country, but the revolution gained support from a significant portion of the population, especially among the poor and religious groups. The new government nationalized large industries and banks, carried out land reform, and introduced Islamic Sharia law. Women were required to wear the hijab, alcohol and gambling were banned, and censorship was introduced. At the same time, social programs for the poor were expanded, and schools and hospitals were built in rural areas. The Iran-Iraq War, which lasted from 1980 to 1988, proved a serious test for the new regime. The conflict began with an Iraqi invasion led by Saddam Hussein, who hoped to exploit the revolutionary chaos in Iran and seize the oil-rich province of Khuzestan. Saddam also counted on the support of Khuzestan's Arab population and the discontent of ethnic minorities with the new regime. The war evolved into a bloody trench warfare involving chemical weapons and resulted in hundreds of thousands of casualties on both sides. Despite suffering enormous losses, Iran managed to hold out and even launched a counteroffensive, but ultimately the war ended without territorial gains. The conflict united the Iranian people around the new regime and demonstrated its viability. The experience of the war strengthened the role of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Basij militia in Iran's political system. The war also demonstrated the importance of developing a domestic military industry, as international sanctions limited arms imports. Following the death of Ayatollah Khomeini in 1989, Ali Khamenei became supreme leader, a position he holds to this day. The 1990s saw a period of gradual liberalization under the presidency of Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, who pursued a policy of economic reconstruction after a devastating war. Some social restrictions were relaxed, foreign investment was encouraged, and the private economy developed. Then the reformist Mohammad Khatami became president, advocating for a dialogue among civilizations and improved relations with the West. However, in the 2000s, more conservative forces, led by President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, came to power. His reign was marked by increased anti-Western rhetoric, a harsher domestic policy, and an intensified nuclear program. Ahmadinejad denied the Holocaust, threatened Israel, and pursued populist economic policies, distributing oil revenues to the population. This led to strained relations with the international community and the impositions of harsh sanctions. The Iranian nuclear program became a source of international tension. Western countries suspected Iran of developing nuclear weapons, leading to the imposition of harsh economic sanctions. In 1981, the first nuclear power plant in Bushehr, built with Russian assistance, was launched. Iran claimed that its nuclear program was exclusively peaceful in nature, but refused full transparency and cooperation with the IAEA. Negotiations over the nuclear program continued for many years and culminated in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in 2015, but the United States later withdrew from the agreement under President Trump. In 2009, following a disputed presidential election in Iran, mass protests dubbed the Green Revolution erupted but were suppressed by the authorities. The opposition accused the government of rigging the election results in favor of Ahmadinejad, leading to the largest demonstrations since the 1979 revolution. The protests continued for several months but were brutally suppressed by security forces. Opposition leaders Mir Hossein Mousavi and Mehdi Karoubi were placed under house arrest. In recent decades, Iran has faced severe economic difficulties due to international sanctions, falling oil prices, and the coronavirus pandemic. Sanctions have limited access to international financial systems, hampered oil exports, and hampered technology imports. This has led to high inflation, youth unemployment, and social unrest. The government has attempted to diversify the economy, develop non-resource sectors, and strengthen ties with China, Russia, and other countries not subject to sanctions. Modern Iran remains a significant regional player, wielding significant influence in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and other countries in the region. Iranian foreign policy is based on opposing American influence in the Middle East and supporting Shiite communities and allied movements. Tehran supports Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Bashar al-Assad government in Syria, the Houthis in Yemen, and Shiite parties in Iraq. This policy has drawn opposition from the United States, Israel, and the Sunni monarchies of the Persian Gulf, led by Saudi Arabia. In 2022, new mass protests erupted in Iran following the death of Mahsa Amini in police custody after she was detained for improperly wearing the hijab. The protests spread across the country and continued for several months under the slogans "Women, Life, Freedom." Demonstrators demanded the abolition of the mandatory hijab, an end to repression, and political reform. The authorities suppressed the protests with force, but they revealed the depth of social discontent, particularly among young people. The history of Iran is one of the remarkable resilience of a people who have managed to preserve their identity through millennia of conquest and upheaval. From the great empires of antiquity to the modern Islamic Republic, this land has always remained a crossroads of civilizations, a meeting place for East and West. The Persian language and culture have spread far beyond the borders of modern Iran, influencing literature, art, and philosophy from India to the Ottoman Empire. Iranian poets, scholars, and artists have made invaluable contributions to world culture, and Iranian statehood has served as a model for many peoples in the region. Today, the Iranian people continue to write their own history, facing the challenges of a globalized world while maintaining a connection to their ancient roots. The younger generation of Iranians aspires to greater freedom and openness to the world, while the authorities strive to preserve revolutionary ideals and Islamic values. Iran's future will depend on whether the country can find a balance between tradition and modernity, between national pride and international integration. What lessons can we learn from this rich history? How do past events impact modern Iran and the entire region? Share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and your opinion matters to us.